Welcome to our meditative evening. Also for some of you watching elsewhere, it may not be an evening, it may be morning or afternoon. But whatever it is, one thing we can be sure of, it's the present moment. All there ever is. And as we sit here, I'd like to suggest, first of all, that you make sure that you're still breathing. That's a little step. Am I still breathing? Just a second, let me check. Yes. In that moment, when you check whether you're breathing, your attention moves away from thinking and begins to move into the body. Of course you're breathing, otherwise you would have collapsed. But mostly, of course, breathing is unconscious. So a very easy step of getting out of being trapped in the continuous mental noise that we call thinking, being trapped in there and being dragged along by every thought that arises. Stepping out, moving your attention voluntarily, not because life has just given you a hard knock. That is another way of getting out of the mind. But simply, okay, am I still breathing? And in that moment, attention moves away from thinking. There's a tiny gap, because in the moment of checking whether you're breathing, you're not thinking. If you're thinking at that moment, you still don't know whether you're breathing or not. So it's only if you stop thinking, it might only be it might only be a second or two. And so, thousands of years ago already, some people discovered that, and then they made it into a meditation. Breath awareness meditation, anapanasati, etc., etc. But it starts with, let me see if I'm still breathing. That's the mini meditation. Anything, when you step out of the noise of thinking, that's meditation. And it is also a different state of consciousness that arises. So let's do it again. Am I still breathing? Yes. And then perhaps you feel a certain aliveness, because you've put some attention into the body. You feel a certain aliveness within. Hard to describe, because it has no shape as such. Somehow you know that you are alive. That's another way of taking attention away from thinking. And so these things become an anchor for being present. Your attention in the now. And that is the new state of consciousness that sometimes in ancient Indian teachings is called the fourth state, because there's dreamless sleep, there's the dream state, there's the ordinary waking state, which is the thinking state, and there's a state of presence in which you have risen above thinking. Sometimes it happens to you accidentally. There are moments in your life when you feel suddenly, without any reason, a deep sense of peace and aliveness in the background. Nothing much has happened. Or you are doing some kind of physical movement that requires your full attention, so that there isn't much room for thinking anymore. You're climbing a mountain, for example. Any thought, and you would slip off the wall, fall off the wall. And as you climb up this mountain, suddenly you feel intense aliveness and presence, and it feels good. The goodness of being alive. And then you come down the mountain, and the moment the danger passes, the mind starts again. And then the mind says, oh, you have to do that again. That was so good. A shock can also do it. Or something suddenly appears in front of you and don't quite know what it is, something entirely new, say an animal as you're walking in the forest or something. So suddenly there's a moment of just presence. The mind hasn't come in and said, oh, this is called such and such, and I saw it last year, and my aunt saw it the year before somewhere. There's just an alert, present space in which the perception arises in that space of alert presence. So the thinking human, the personality, the thinking person with its history, its story, its problematic story. I don't think there's any story that's not problematic, any life story that is not problematic and has a certain heaviness to it. Let me tell you about it. So that recedes and is replaced by a space of awareness, aware presence. In that state of aware presence, the mind can still operate, but it is relatively unimportant. A thought may come, and you're much more likely, if a thought does come, that it will be an original thought that is empowered, not a repetitive old thought that you've thought about, a thought that you've had thousands of times. Because most thoughts in your head, and it's nothing personal in anybody's head, most thoughts that you think you have thought many, many times. It's the old thoughts. It's easier to see it in others. Your relatives, old. So in the absence of presence, there's only that repetitive mental noise. And part of that mental noise is the story of me. It's the problematic story. that is hoping at some point in the future it will no longer be problematic. Not realizing that what it calls future has no actual existence except as another thought. The only existence what we call future has is as a thought in your head. Beyond that, there's no such thing as future. If there were such a thing as future, somebody, some great explorer, would have found it. And we would have a monument. He discovered the future. So far, it hasn't happened, and it's not likely to happen, because it is a conceptual thing only. When the future comes, which is a thought, it can only appear in the space of your aware presence, the light of consciousness. It can only appear as the now, whatever form it takes in the space of now that you are. Something appears. That's the now, the form of now. So, no such thing as future. Future is a thought. And this also applies to the past. Because apart from the thoughts in your head, let's say, this happened to me, I did this, he did this to me, she did that to me, I did that to him and them, and then they did that, and then... It didn't happen in the past. When it happened, if it ever happened, because you know how the mind works, it gradually, as it reinterprets the future, so what you see as things that actually happened, maybe they didn't. Or maybe they did, but when they happened, it was the now, the only place where things can happen. And in order to have the idea that there is such a thing as future, you have to think about that now. So it's only in the light of now that the appearance of future arises. But again, of course, there is no past. Even if time travel were a possibility, you could only arrive ever in the now. You could never say, oh, now I'm in the past. You see, already the sentence doesn't make sense. Now I'm in the past. I've traveled to the Roman times, and now I'm here in the past. No, you're in the now. We cannot fully understand, nor do we need to, through the analytical mind, how it is that it appears as if there were future and past. But we can see without making it into a philosophy, but in a much more simple way, by simply looking and seeing all there ever is now. That is direct evidence. Time, which is past and future, can only appear as a thought. Time, you can, if you were a police inspector and you were looking for a criminal called time, a very dangerous criminal, because he goes around murdering people all the time and killing off everything first deceiving them that time is going to get them where they want to get to, and then after this criminal has deceived them, he or she kills them. Everybody's hoping to get to the future, and of course the very essence of future is, in the end, it kills you. The time kills you. Everybody's hoping for more time to fulfill themselves. And then time gets you. So the police inspector, looking for the criminal called time, can only find secondary evidence. Yeah, he's been here. There's a dead body. Or he's been there, there's a rotten apple here. And then you can go on looking, or you can look at a photo of yourself 25 years ago, 30 years ago, and then look in the bathroom mirror. And then you see, again, you have secondary evidence of this, what this criminal has already done to you. And he's going to do more. Even more damage. And yet, time itself you cannot experience. People think they're experiencing time. You don't experience time, you experience only ever the now. But sometimes people call that time. I don't know why. It's the now. So you don't experience past, you don't experience future, you cannot experience time. The criminal can never be caught because the criminal is a phantom. And yet, bodies die. So who kills them if there is no time? Let's not go too far into all this. We cannot deny that in this surface reality there seems to be such a thing as time. We use time really to fill in some void that we don't understand. Say, okay, it's time. Time does that. It seems to exist. It seems that you cannot get out of it. It seems that it has you, it drags you along, and you deteriorate further and further, and finally you dissolve. Okay, that seems to be the case as far as the world of form is concerned. Forms are short-lived. And the very essence of the thinking mind is that it's usually thinking about past and future, and its very thought processes are conditioned by the past. What you think is conditioned by your past. The question is there another dimension to you, to me, where this, what is ultimately an illusory thing, does not apply anymore? Is there a dimension in you where there is no time? Not as something to believe in, some comforting belief, but to actually to be known firsthand. This brings me to the purpose of your life, which is they tell me, the title of this talk. I could get it in there. the purpose of your life, if there is such a thing, is twofold: primary purpose and secondary purpose. Primary purpose does not involve time, and that's a very strange thing. Usually, the moment you talk about purpose, you immediately think, okay, future. Usually you can't think of purpose without bringing up the idea of future, because it seems to imply that purpose is there and I'm here. Purpose is where you want to get to. And whether or not you get there determines whether there's success or failure. So, what I'm suggesting is for you to realize that there is another kind of purpose, which is primary purpose. Secondary purpose involves time, and we will get to that a little later. But primary purpose we can't get to a little later, because primary purpose is to do with realizing what the purpose is for your life is without time. And the first thing first little pointer we can use is to say, okay, I can tell you what the purpose is. The primary purpose is to sit here in that chair. And my primary purpose is to be here and talking. Your primary purpose is to sit there and listen, but the listening and the talking isn't that much different, because I can say that I'm listening to the words that come out of this mouth, so it's the same thing basically. Your primary purpose is to sit here, to be sitting here. The universe has conspired to put you here. Now my purpose is to put the glass back on the table. In what way is that different? If I know that this is my purpose, in what way is that different from the normal way of doing it? Thinking about something else while I do it. The normal way of drinking a glass of water is you want to get there already. While you pick up the glass, you already want it to be here. And while you're sipping the water, you want the water to be already in your stomach. And while it's traveling back towards the table, you already want it to be there, even while it's still here. And this is only a tiny example of how people spend their whole life not really wanting to be with what they're doing, because every doing is a means to an end. And so they are not fulfilling their primary purpose at all. They are missing the whole thing. If every action you take, or almost every action, or 95%, 99%, whatever it is, even 90%, whatever you are doing is really a means to an end. And where's the end? In the future. And where is the future? It's a thought in your head. So that is the fate of humans, which is the fate of humanity right now, although some are beginning to step out of it, to live in such a way that is extremely frustrating and gives rise to continuous discontent, stress, anxiety, fear, and all kinds of things because you are not fulfilling your primary purpose, which is to be aligned with the now, the only thing there ever is. Internally aligned with the now, instead of reducing whatever you are doing in the now or wherever you are in the now, never being fully where you are because your thoughts are taking you somewhere else. And never fully being in the doing of what you are doing. So the doing is a means to an end. This is the fate of humans who are trapped in the mind, who are trapped in thinking, because it's because you are trapped in thinking that you live always for the next thing, because the next thing is a thought. So your purpose is to live aligned with what is, so that nothing that you do is a means to an end, but is an end in itself. That's the primary purpose. The secondary purpose is, yes, it's also a means to an end, but it's unimportant as such. My primary purpose, I'll do it again. The glass is traveling, and it's fine. It's a beautiful moment. The next moment is not going to be better than this one. When the water reaches my lips, it's fine. It's fine. And it's beautiful to hold this glass, the shimmering water, see the aliveness of it. Well, of course, if you're in the thinking mind, you don't see it. It's a glass of water. What are you talking about? If you're trapped in the thinking mind, you inhabit a conceptual universe that is dead. Because everything you label, and you have concepts for everything, and that's a glass of water, there's nothing miraculous about this. No, because you have never really looked. You've never really experienced it, neither when you're swimming, nor when you're in the shower, nor when you're drinking it. You've never actually truly experienced water, because mind, thinking, was always interfering and creating a phantom conceptual universe that most people are completely trapped in. So they don't experience the aliveness of the universe around them. One could say they are not present, they are not where they are, and they are not total in what they do, because every doing is a means to some end. The end is in a phantom dimension called future, which never arrives. I'm describing the human condition. It's painful. Suffering, the Buddha called it. It's suffering. It creates continuous suffering, either low-level suffering, as is discontent, irritation, or more acute forms of suffering. So, primary purpose is to be here fully and to be total in whatever you do, so that it does not become reduced, so that the preciousness of the present moment does not become reduced to a means to an end. And there already you have your life purpose, primary. That's the very foundation of your life. And many times you forget your primary purpose. But now, at least now you know it. It's not, I haven't told you anything new, because when you listen to these words, you say, oh, of course, I knew that. It's so obvious. It's so obvious. You don't need convincing. You knew that. Of course I knew that. So why didn't I live it? Wrong question. question is, am I living it now? Okay. And that's the continuous practice of being in the present moment. Many times, probably, you lose sight of your primary purpose, and you fall back into some form of dysfunction, which the world calls normal behavior, normal existence. And you can watch films, TV, video, whatever, films, video, and they're all manifesting the same normal dysfunction. That's what it's all based on. With occasionally you get little glimpses here and there. That's always wonderful to see. Glimpses of sanity coming into the insanity of normal existence. So primary purpose has nothing to do, for example, with how old you are. Secondary purpose is to do with what you do as a so-called individual, and it's secondary, so we're not going into this right now, but as I said, a little later. Primary purpose, you could be 95 years old, you could have only one more day to live, 1 more hour to live. Primary purpose would still apply. Even if you have 1 minute to live or a few seconds to live, you can totally fulfill your primary purpose. And enter presence. Presence is the arising of something new. Timeless is a better word. It arises in you, a timeless dimension of consciousness. And I cannot explain to you, beyond a few little pointers, what presence is. I suggested, check if you're breathing or not. There's a presence. As I speak about it now, there are 2 dimensions to this moment here, the words and the presence. The presence is nothing to do with words or thinking. It is formless. You cannot say, there it is. You can never make presence into an object, a mind object, because presence is the eternal subject. Presence is the eternal I am. Presence. In the New Testament, Jesus called it the kingdom of heaven. And it says literally, the kingdom of heaven does not come with signs to be perceived. And you can't say, I've got it now. There it is. It is, I'm reluctant to use any word to describe it, but I'll use some. They're only pointers. It is the consciousness itself, before the consciousness becomes a form, as a thought, an emotion, a sense perception. It is the stillness underneath all your thinking, which has always been there, will always be there, because it's timeless. Underneath all the thinking, there is a vast realm of consciousness that you touch when the mind subsides. For a moment, there's a space between 2 thoughts in which you are conscious but not thinking. And in that space, you're looking at a glass of water and you see, without naming it, and you can sense its aliveness, because you can sense your own aliveness. And your own aliveness and the aliveness of this glass of water are one and the same aliveness. So the sense of separation disappears that you have when you're trapped in continuous mental labeling. Here's the glass of water, and here is I am here, my name, my history, and all that. And then you look at a flower, and you don't call it, you don't give it a name. You don't need to call it any. To truly see the flower, the mind needs to be still, and you're looking at it through stillness rather than mental noise. So the stillness, not the person that you thought you were, is looking at the flower, and ultimately realizing that the flower is pervaded by the same stillness that pervades you, and so there's a recognition. And whatever you perceive is pervaded by the same formless no-thingness that the mind cannot understand, that no scientist has ever found. They haven't even started to look. And so it is a new way of being in the world, where you are no longer primarily a time-based entity called a person, sustained by continuous thought activity. I mustn't stop thinking because I won't know who I am anymore. If I stop telling myself the story of me and telling others so that I can get some feedback and confirmation that the story of me is real, if I stop telling the self-talk, if the self-talk that upholds my identity comes to an end, who am I? Carry on talking. What do you think of this talk? Well, I think he's got a few points there, but on the other hand, I don't... I read another book last week. It said the opposite of what he said, so I have to try to let you work that out. He says there's no time, but I absolutely disagree with that. Or even worse, it's all a load of rubbish, or garbage in America. Everything is labeled the moment it arises. The little man commenting on everybody you meet, and immediately it has something to say about the other person. And usually what it has to say has something to do with me and my story, and how this other person might fit into my story or doesn't fit into my story, or could make my story more interesting, or is threatening my story. Oh, I don't like him. And of course, there's no meeting. You never meet the other person. You're meeting your own mind structures, your mind forms, and you think you're meeting somebody else. And in that state, many people get married. They never really met. And then, of course, very soon it becomes unsatisfying. Because you find out that the other person doesn't really fit into your story as well as you thought. And instead of enhancing your mind-made sense of self, becomes a threat to your mind-made sense of self. Okay, it's time to get a divorce lawyer. That was a big mistake, now let's look for somebody else. A new way of living so that this little man or woman in the head doesn't run your life anymore. There's nothing wrong with this little man or woman except when he or she runs your life, because it'll make a mess of it. It has good intentions, I don't doubt that, it has good intentions. But that's where the proverb, the phrase comes from, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. This is when the ego yes, I want to protect myself and I need the best for myself, of course. Wonderful intentions, and always creates havoc. Not only in people's personal lives, but collectively the ego, the collective human ego, creates even worse havoc in the collective, which you can read about when you read a history book. I bought a history book the other day, I saw it in a bookstore and looked interesting, and I read a few pages here and there. It's a thick book, Harvard professor of history, very well written, and he emphasizes a little bit more the human side of history rather than the conceptual side of politicians getting together and all that nonsense. But the human suffering is so vast and unbelievable. What humans, it's the 20th century history. It's called War of the World. The suffering is so unbelievable. I mean, I already knew how insane history is. I talk about it a lot. But there I saw it again, and it is even more insane than I had realized. Speechless. And this is what a dysfunctional state of consciousness produces. In one's personal life, it might look relatively harmless, but it produces dissatisfaction, continuous dissatisfaction and conflict, and never unease, never being really at ease for long. Or you might be at ease with somebody, you fall in love with somebody, but it doesn't last, that sense of ease. If there's no shift in human consciousness, the madness will continue, and another 100 years, I don't believe the planet could survive another 100 years if there's no change in the collective consciousness. But a change in the collective does not happen until the change happens in the individual. The individuals make up the collective. This is why we are here. We are seeing, we are looking at the insanity and how it works. And that is already the first step in liberation. Because who is it in you that can see the truth of this? Who or what is it in you that recognizes madness as madness, insanity as insanity, and might even laugh, because it's so insane, either you cry or you laugh, or both? Who is it? What is it in you that sees your own mind? It's continuous chatter, it's continuous self-talk, it's how negative it is a lot of the time, because negative thoughts are much more prevalent than positive thoughts. You can say, oh, what a beautiful flower, but you won't think about that for very long. But a negative thought will survive for half an hour, 2 hours in your mind. The thought, a beautiful flower, which again is not, you haven't really seen the flower, it's a superficial thing. That thought remains perhaps for 10 seconds. Oh, that's a beautiful flower, and now let me think about what he did to me yesterday and what he said and what I'm going to do to him tomorrow. Oh. So what is arising is a dimension from where you are able to see what the mind is doing, awareness. The shift is from being a thought-based entity to an awareness-based, I don't even want to say entity, because you are much more vast. When who you are, you realize that who you are has nothing to do with the thoughts that are going through your head. It is vaster and deeper. It is, you touch it when there's a moment of a gap between two thoughts. And you can never define that through thought. That's why sometimes in some meditation practices or some spiritual teachings, you use the words, the question, who am I, as a little mantra or a little pointer. Who am I? Now, that of course is still a thought. Those are still words. Who am I? This can actually work if you are alert and do not attempt to answer the question. Whatever answer you find after you ask, who am I, that's not it. Who am I? The answer is in the space of alert, silent presence after the question. Who am I? I don't know. Oh. That's it. That's it. You can't grasp it. It's the essence of identity, of what you feel. Everybody feels there's something very precious. I am precious. And this sense of preciousness that people, you don't want to lose that. Even people whose life is relatively unpleasant, they still don't want to lose their sense of I. But the sense of I gets usually mixed up with a story in the head. I am this, I am that. What we are doing here, we are attempting to take the sense of beingness or I or consciousness itself out of its identifications with form, which primarily are thought forms. So consciousness has been dreaming the dream of form. This is why, from the point of view of an awakened being, the normal human state is a dreamlike state. And if you discover that in yourself, if you get glimpses of, or many of you more than glimpses, of what it is to be present,